Welcome to the Highland Waves podcast, coming to you from Marshbrook Studios, situated on a bank of the Margaree River in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Canada. At Highland Waves, we feature stories about the people, the places, and the visitors who come to see us here in Inverness County. I'm Pat Wall, your host. This morning, with me in studio is Mr. Korey Pike. Welcome to Highland Waves, Kory.
Great to be here.
Kory is a financial advisor with Canada Life who advises a variety of clients, including businesses, professional, and ordinary folks just like me. Kory, you were born in Lab City?
I was, yeah. Born and raised.
Yeah, okay. In the big land of Labrador. Describe your journey to Nova Scotia.
I'll give it a little, I always like to give a little story about Labrador. The one claim to fame I always love is that it had to be minus 63 degrees Celsius to cancel school growing up. Temperatures I don't think we see these days anymore, or at least it was measured different. So to come to Nova Scotia, a bit of my journey was Memorial University of Newfoundland. That was in the early 90s. From there, I, as a typical East Coaster, traveled out west chasing work. So I spent some time in Edmonton, finally Northern Ontario from there, then Toronto, an opportunity to go back to Labrador, work with the Department of Health, and then finally opportunity to pursue a different career path, still on the medical side originally, in Halifax, taking over Atlantic Canada as a territory manager.
Okay.
And then within the last approximately 10 years ago, a career shift into wealth management.
So you've been into this business, a financial advisor for over 10 years now.
Yeah, 10 years. Yeah, always had a good background on it through family upbringing, where my grandfather was pretty astute into it, and my dad sort of put some guidelines and check marks and stuff in place that I took care of myself early on in life.
Okay, so you had lots of people to inspire you to go that route.
Yeah, probably at the time. I don't know how inspiring it was at the time. I felt maybe a little bit handcuffed, but you know what? Very happy and grateful for the path that was provided towards me.
To me, a financial advisor is a generic term and quite varied.
Yeah.
Perhaps you can tell our listeners about the services you provide.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very broad spectrum, but so is the industry. The industry is very broad, so it's very hard to, I guess, encapsulate one term of what it means. So for me, financial planning is everyone has to have their own guidelines and their own processes of how they work. So for me, it's very simple, as coming into it as not quote unquote later in life, but in my 40s, into a new career path. I had experience of what I thought I would want in someone sitting across from me as an advisor and me as a client. And some of those are true today. Is what I do is, like, for me, it's very evident when someone approaches you and you can tell that it's a transactional relationship. That's, to me, that's just sort of personally off-putting. So my sort of goal is to always form that relationship style of approach, where the benefit of finding out that relationship style or approach is you get to dig in deeper to what really means the most to your client. And that could be anything from debt reduction, cash flow analysis, want to leave money to charities, philanthropy stuff, and then just guidance of even someone runs a business. How can we be a little bit more business effective? How do I wind down my business? How do I sell it? How do I extract cash out of the business? So, and then on the personal side, it's like, it's a gratifying thing when people put their trust and their faith in you to help them guide you and walk you through their life goals and their financial plans.
It's quite a responsibility.
And shouldn't never be taken lightly. It's it's an honor, actually. I'm and we've known each other for a while, and I become as engaged and involved in as much the personal lives as I do just from a relationship and a business relationship.
What qualifications do you need to be a financial advisor?
Yeah. So the actual qualifications, you have to obviously get your license in through a series of exams, and the marks have to be above a certain level. There's continuing ongoing education. We call them CE credits, which there's so much change as things evolve. Your learning evolves. So it's a continual learning profession, and I try to stay on top of the continual learning as best I can.
Well, if you fall back in any walk of life today, the way things are going, everything is always on the move.
Yep. Yeah, you have to be adaptive. And I learned early on from multiple careers is there's a lot of people resistant to change, but you know what? Change is inevitable, and you have to be able to embrace it and adapt with it.
Is there a regulatory body that sort of oversees what you do?
Yeah, it's a bit of a change in the regulatory body that's coming up. It's actually amalgamating all into one, but right now, from my perspective, it's the MFDA, Mutual Funds Dealers Association. It is now moving to a combination of securities, mutual funds, where on that side it's all going to be called CERO, but that's to come shortly.
Okay. We talked about education before, and in my opinion, there are 3 fundamental requirements in life. It's food, shelter, and sex. And I think money should be added in there. I've always felt that financial education should start somewhere in the early ages of maybe 14 or so in schools in the middle grades. What's your opinion?
Totally agree. I think it's a tool that if you don't get introduced to it early, and not necessarily get full comprehension because you don't need, but you should have some awareness of it. And that's everything from cash management to even understanding how bills work, how credit cards work, because we really run in a credit society now. It's almost become a cashless society. But understanding maybe those simple basics of walking someone how to do their taxes for the first time. But also the bigger one for me is budgeting. Not necessarily, you start with a baseline, or you build a foundation, and you get a foundation of a younger boy or girl that is, understanding that, hey, if I make $1,000 a month and I'm spending $1,200, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So budgeting is really important, and cash flow analysis is part of that exercise. It should be a curriculum. It should be, I don't know what course it would fall into at least the Nova Scotia education system, but there should be like a family matters or a family course where it's a mandated course that every student has to go through.
Yeah, I completely agree, because you see the results of it every day, in my opinion anyway. Do you have children?
I have 2 children. Yeah.
Okay.
Proud dad of 2.
And do you educate them?
100%. Yeah. It's been a very early on adoption, and I received it a little bit later in life, not from school. Back then, there was motivation like, hey, you do well in a test, here's $5 or $2 back in the 80s and 90s. But the one thing that my dad taught me the most was I was very fortunate to have a good paying job while I was going to university, and that's when I really got first introduced to the value of saving money. More, I think Dad did it for me, more of a protection side. Going away to university, going to university with a pocket full of money probably wasn't the ideal circumstance.
Red flags there.
I don't. So no, I mean, and then you learn along the way as you go. Sure. Even when I was in medical sales, every time I traveled, some of my good friends work in this industry, and I'd always be picking brains and asking questions. Sure. And it's almost like a lifelong learning. Right, to keep yourself on top of things, right?
You're teaching your children. Are they listening?
My son, who's just finished his second year going into accounting, very, very good with numbers. My 13-year-old daughter, she likes money. She likes money.
So that's what it does for her.
Yeah. You know what I mean? She's very. Both my kids are very self-motivated to earn money as well.
Okay.
Which to me, I think is a good teaching practice to understand that, is what you put out is what you get sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Can you give our listeners an example or two of the consequences of that lack of financial knowledge that can affect them later in life?
Yeah. I see it on occasion and more frequently than I'd like to see it. I do get people that come to me, later on in their careers and saying, hey, I'm only 10, 15 years away from retirement, and this is the lifestyle that I want to have when I retire. The problem in there is it's hard to play catch up, right? So to me, that's one where, money is an emotional thing. So sometimes you have to show them like the analytics of it. So it's important that you can actually show things on paper or through software programs that you have to get there. So to me, that's probably the biggest one that I've seen where people are either afraid of it or procrastinate it, and life events get in the way, right? You come out of university or school, or you go straight in the workforce. You have a mortgage, you have bills, you have your first vehicle, kids come along. Most people don't have readily cash available, so they can't really start their accumulation phase until they get a bit more positive cash flow. And that's typically, tied to kids getting older and they're not really, on the bankroll, as we say, or the house starts to get paid off. So, we gotta, try to find even a little bit when you're young makes a big difference later on in life. Okay. And that's part of the education part, I believe, as well. If you in school can show the power of compounding, right, then it's an important thing to recognize early.
Yeah. Leaving aside for a moment that there isn't training available or it's not readily available, what is your advice as to when you should start taking your financial situation seriously?
Ooh, good question. No different than every individual. Like, nothing's cookie cutter. I'm a firm believer that you have to live life now as much as you have to live life later on. So it's a happy medium between doing a cash flow analysis, and if you have positive cash flow, you should determine where that extra money goes. And I look at it in 3 buckets. One is live now, because you can't take it with you. And my situation. I unfortunately lost my spouse, and you don't plan for that. 2 is I'm a firm believer in debt reduction. So if you have debt, you should use some of that money to pay off debt early so that it increases your cash flow. And 3rd is you have to pay yourself forward. And what I mean by that is putting away a little bit of that money. It doesn't have to be equal. If you have a $500 net cash flow or a positive cash flow on a monthly basis, you can divide that in whatever percentage you want. And it's all personal preference, what your priorities are. But the sooner the better. Like, so if you get into the workforce and you start making a paycheck, if you initialize yourself for a future on a financial standpoint, if you put away a few dollars right off the get-go and you get used to doing it, you don't miss it after a while.
Let's start by assuming I'm about to hire you.
Yep.
How will our relationship work? How often will we meet?
Yeah.
How will I be supported?
Yeah. So for me, my approach is probably similar to most, but I'm a slow process and relationship builder. So I like to meet a few times, no paperwork, just to get to know people, find out what their goals and like we talked about earlier, those goals can be anything from just, hey, I want to have $1 million when I retire, to I want to pay off debt, I want to help my kids. Before you get even started, you really need to know where your clients' priorities lie. So I think that's first and foremost. From there, once you get that done, it's reconfirmation of the process that we're putting in place. So for me, that's part of the collaboration between an advisor and a client, right? So I think it's very important to have the collaboration. And part of that collaboration comes down to certain things like making sure what we discussed is reinforced. There's transparency in every reaction that we do, or every action that we do, and then thirdly, it's the follow up and agreeing upon what you just said. So I have some clients that I meet, once a month, once a quarter, and there's some that says no, we're fine, we'll call you if we need something. So It's everyone's individual, and you have to respect what those are, but you define it. Like, it's really important to discuss it ahead of time, because then at least if you know what the expectations are on both fronts.
What should I be thinking about to prepare for that first meeting?
I think it's going into your first meeting it's almost like an interview process, I think. The interview process is someone that I feel that has values that I have, someone that I believe is a trustworthy individual, and a person that would, do as that person would say. So, follow up and stick to itiveness. I think it's, the initial meeting, the first reactions is, it's always tough, but I think it's the relationship gets formed after the second, third, fourth meeting. The first one is all essentially first impressions. And it's tough, and it's tough as an advisor, because for me, when you first meet someone, the last thing you want to do is talk about here's your credentials of what you do. The old adage, right? You have two ears, one mouth, right? So a lot of it should be, fact-finding questions, making sure we're both compatible for each other, okay, right?
So I should have my long and short-term goals somewhat in my head, as an example.
I think so. I think most people, when they're willing to meet with an advisor, there's a reason why they want to meet with an advisor. Okay. They're already going into it. They're saying, okay, either, I have a goal, right? I just don't know how to get there. Okay. And I need a pathway. I need someone to help me establish what the goal. And short-term and long-term goals sort of really tie into one. And like short-term goals may just be a major capital purchase, okay, or getting my kids' education paid. But you already premeditated what that is, okay, going in.
So if I don't have them set, you'll help me do that.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the relationship building, to find out what those priorities are. Because sometimes people don't know what their priorities are by definition. They know them sort of subconsciously. And that's really building that relationship to help bring that out.
Are there regulatory considerations that I should disclose? Like my debts and, all of that kind of thing?
Yeah. Yes and no, but I don't think that's what you do on day one. Like, I think that's as you get comfortable and you build that relationship. When it comes to, and it's also figuring out what that person is like. Like, some people are more, what's the word? Like, they don't mind debt, right? Some people hate debt. So you have to know, like, if you're willing to say, hey, I did something silly, I sent money to a long lost cousin, and you got, I guess swindled, I guess is a good word, but there's so much of that going on now that, and you want to be able to pay it back. Then if you want to work with someone for advice, you do have to have a little bit of openness, but it's really hard in the initial process to be able to just, lay all your cards on the table until you form that relationship.
I don't want to know how you run your business, but most people will probably ask you, what is it going to cost me for that first interview? And what are my costs throughout the process should I take you on as an advisor? Yeah, no,
good question. I get that quite a bit. I even get questions like, what can I pay you for today? And it's like, the way I do it is personally, and everyone's different, is all meetings, what I'm trying to do is build a relationship. And my goal is to have a client for a long time, right? So there's no upfront charges per se. Once we sign into, just say it's on the investment side, most investments have an embedded fee inside of them, and they're called MERs, which is management expense ratios. Inside that management expense ratio, there's a portion of that pie chart that gets paid to your advisor.
Okay.
And then that's an annual ongoing fee that's paid to your funds.
What is your overall investment and financial planning philosophy?
I think everyone should have a financial plan, first and foremost. No different than if you look at wills, like we talked about previously, 60% of Canadians don't have wills. There's probably more than that don't have a financial plan. And the reason part of that is part of my philosophy is it doesn't matter. I don't care if you have $100 in the bank or $10 million in the bank. It's analytics. And some of that helps shape the way your financial plan is going to go, or the way it goes. And some of it could be just as much as worrying about what your estate tax is going to be at the end. So I think it's very important that as part of, and some of the philosophies and some of the core values that I have is every one of my client commits to a financial plan.
Okay. Can you explain the difference between active and passive investing?
Yeah. So passive investments, I'll start with that one, is essentially when you buy a group of funds. And they literally just, you're hoping that if it's a group of funds of 400, you're hoping that 201 of them do better than 199. And they're not watched on a daily basis by a portfolio manager. So basically we're letting those run, hoping that they do well in the markets. And as well, they do get reviewed on on some form of basis, typically annual basis, depending on the size of the funds that are in that portfolio. An active managed portfolio is there's a portfolio manager assigned to that portfolio. Typically it has a lot less funds in it, anywhere from 20 to 80 funds or less or more, but they actually have a grasp on each of the companies that are in that fund. And from there, they can make pivoted changes if reportings aren't good, if debt ratio is high, they can sell off that fund and buy someone else.
With things changing so rapidly and, market trends and economic changes, how far out do you research when you're looking at getting a portfolio together for somebody?
Yeah. Putting portfolios together is, you have to have a bit of faith in the longevity of the portfolio manager that's attached, because we can only really look retrospective, right? We can see how funds have performed, but one of the things that I do look for is how long has that portfolio manager been on that fund? What are the returns, or how has that manager performed? Because we want to see what the consistency is of that portfolio manager. So it's important to look retrospectively, and also a lot of times they'll give insights or highlights of what they're looking at in the coming years and what companies they're beginning to follow.
Okay. What are your predictions for the current situation, the economic situation we're in, caused by the incidents at the border?
We have some turbulence. We definitely have some turbulence. I think if we go back to the early start of the administration of early February, late January, we definitely saw some rough roads early on. But as you saw, as there some pivots went, we saw pretty good gains to almost bring us back flat again. So I think we're going to have a bit of that. In reading, most economists think we're still going to be a net positive year, but it's not going to be nearly as good coming out of like a 2022 where we saw equities have really big gains. It's going, without a doubt, I think it's going to be very turbulent. The market is so reactionary to even a simple tweet that, there's no predictability, right? And, coming into, Trump's second administration, most economists were thinking, it's like, oh my God, we're going to have a bull run, because he's very concerned of how he looks on the markets, and the markets do well. He says, oh, we had the best markets of all time under my leadership. Yeah. And it sort of threw everyone for a little bit of a curveball when he came out and sort of rocked the world a little bit. He's rescinded on some of it, and you know what, and the markets have adjusted because of it.
In general, how have your clients done through this turbulent period? Yeah,
pretty good. It's a bit of an education thing as well, right? There's that if you look at the markets over 3-year periods, or they're always positive. Yeah. So it's already, typically I meet, and when I meet with clients, I explain that, but we don't need to look at 1-year numbers. Sure, we obviously look at them, but we don't base the plan on a 1-year plan, because a company can have a home run that year, and they've done negative for the past 15 years. So most of the clients were really good. Most of them had the understanding that we got to see it through, and there's lots of stats out there that if you miss the best 5 days or 7 days of a recovery, like your portfolio will never regain what it would have lost in a couple bad down days.
Sure.
So it's like hold the course is the adage, right? Or look for buying opportunities. And I had some clients that had money on the sidelines waiting for the right time for that money to be reallocated.
Okay. Changing to retirement planning.
Yep.
What are the key elements of a successful retirement plan?
Yeah. Obviously the most successful one is sort of what you do pre-retirement. Right? You have to build to where that is. 2 is you have to understand sort of what your expenditure is going to be on a monthly basis, right? And be willing to know that, your first 10, 15 years of retirement may cost more per month than your last, hopefully decades of retirement. So you sort of balance it to what that number is. Making sure that how CPP OAS works and how that ties into your retirement plan. A lot of people, sort of think of it as like, I don't have to worry about that, but don't look a gift horse in the mouth. In Canada, if we have a married couple that have, max CPP and max OAS, it's, north of $20,000 a year, right? Per person.
Okay.
Per person. So that's $40,000 a year of income coming in, pre-tax obviously, but But then really, when you work with your financial planner into retirement, is it's not necessarily handcuffing how much money you can take, but just making sure there's like guidance along the way that, hey, have those courageous conversations. Like, if you spend $80,000 on this car, you're pulling that out of a taxable investment. What impacts would that have? So a lot of it's understanding taxes, trying to minimize taxes as best you can, and as well making sure that there's no major change of lifestyle.
Is estate planning part of retirement planning?
100%. It should be.
Okay.
It's a scary thought because a lot of people don't do estate planning, and that goes to the wills, and even like having those conversations like I just mentioned earlier, the courageous conversations with loved ones, even your spouse, like saying I want X amount of dollars to go to my grandkids instead of my daughter. Like having those conversations and make sure your assets get to where you want them to go. And assets doesn't necessarily mean money. It could be like, your family home, your car, you have an antique motorbike, whatever it may be, or artwork, and even a pet. Even it boils down to like if you have a pet.
So everybody should do retirement and estate planning.
Yes. I believe so, yes.
When should they start to do that?
So from a financial planning spot, young professionals are getting it a little earlier is what I'm seeing from when I probably know my friends. So I'm seeing people doing it now in their early 20s to mid 20s once they get into the workforce. But I think that comes there's a lot of education out there now too. Like there's a lot more TV ads in regards to, securing your financial future, right? So that's the early part. On the retirement planning, the hardest thing that I have when I do a retirement plan, when someone says, hey, I want to retire at 63 or 65. And then when we look at the analytics and it says, you know what, it's telling us that either you have to put more money away or you have to work longer. That's a hard conversation, right? So to me, the earlier, the better. But it's also a hard conversation. Not a lot of people want to have those courageous conversations.
How do you protect my personal and financial information if I'm a client of yours?
Yeah, so we everything is encrypted, like from sharing of data. Like when we send out data to you personally, if you request it, we basically have a password protected. We also have CRM systems that are, we have, and I don't claim to know the background, but with Canada Life, they have their security systems in the background that everything is protected on that side.
What's a CRM?
It's our management system that holds your files.
Okay.
Sorry. It's funny, when I was in medical, I dealt with CRMs. Do you know what's the acronym stand for?
I'm not sure.
Something record, centralized
record management?
Yeah. I'll have to look that up. I apologize. Yeah.
Okay.
I just know the acronym. There's so many acronyms out there. Sorry about that.
What about backup? If you get sick or run over by a bus, what happens?
Yeah, so I personally have a contingency plan in place. So it's basically work with another advisor that has access to my files if anything were to happen. So that's a protection thing. I think most advisors should have an emergency transition plan, and that's really getting it out in writing to make sure that if something were to happen, that your clients are taken care of.
What motivates you in your profession?
Oh, people. Yeah, strategies and working with people and helping people get to where they need to be, and if they're not getting there, help them get there to make their goals happen. And then like the relationship side, there's nothing that's cookie cutter. Everyone has a different relationship and everyone has different goals, different needs. And, to me, that's strategic part, and working collaboratively with someone is probably the most joy that I get out of the whole thing.
Oh, great. If we were to start over again, would you change anything?
No. I think our pathways build us to where we are, right? I've gotten this question before because the 10 years of that I've had in wealth management, I've built built my business pretty well. And people are like, oh, do you wish you would have started early? I said, no. I said, you know what? Life experiences that I've done before has helped me in my pathway in how I deal with people, how I relate to people, building my own process. And some of those are just built over time. That's just, what you gain as you get older and you get more experience to things, right? Yeah. So, I mean, obviously then when my wife passed, I mean, that's obviously something, if I could change, I would do that
of course,
10 times over to a million, right?
Yeah.
So
what advice would you have for someone considering getting into the financial advisory profession?
Yeah, it's really tough. We actually, the industry that we have right now, it's really hard for young kids to get into it. And I'll give you a good reason why is because typically you build your client base based on your peer group or your people that you know. And so you get someone coming out of university and you're trying to build your book of business. A lot of your friends are like you, other than family, just getting out of school that have, maybe your first car payment, maybe, your rent on your own. So cash flow isn't always as positive as you want to be. So I think if a young person or even someone in their 30s or 40s are getting into it, partnership is a good way to do it. Find someone that you don't want to go just because you think there's an opportunity, but you have like values. I think if you align yourself with someone that's like you'll have more success because, not only will you learn, but your client's transition will be much smoother. And then that way you get to build a better reputation and get to build a better, not quote unquote book of business, but relationship with those partners. And what I mean by partners is your clients along the way.
That's good advice. How do people contact you?
So I'm not a huge social media guy. And that's just because, like, for me, most of my clients come through referrals, which to me, I garner that as the best lead source out there because two reasons. One is the person to refer you obviously has faith in what you do and trust in what you do. Two is now it also puts me on wanting to do well, not only for the client, but also to maintain that trust with the person that gives me. So for me, for advertisement, a lot of my advertisement is, just more word of mouth and through other clients, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we finish, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think it's important to sometimes have that uncomfortable conversation with yourself where to move next. So if you haven't developed a plan, there's lots of people out there that do this. You can go to your bank and ask them for a financial plan, depending on your relationship inside the bank. But I think it's also like, a bit of honesty. Sometimes we internalize ourselves and sometimes we make it sound better than what it is. But when you put honest pen to paper, I think it's important to go through that process. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else that I should add? No, I think that's pretty much it. I think it's, start with a conversation.
Okay.
Start with a conversation.
You can use a telephone number if you want on this program or
for my own personal telephone?
Yes.
Yeah. If anyone just wants to have a conversation, I'm always open to a conversation. 902-499-6893 is my cell phone number. And then text or call. And if we get into like a little bit more, like we'll share emails, and then and then I'm a big proponent of face-to-face meetings.
Okay.
I think at least I know there's times that you have to do virtual, but I don't think you should ever meet someone first from a virtual standpoint. I think it's very important to have the conversation where you can see body language and understand, like, if someone's really there,
knocking on the door.
Yeah.
Well, Kory, thank you very much for taking the time to travel to Margaree and shed light on the importance of financial education and planning. Yeah. I wish you well, and to those who would like help with their financial situation, I'm sure you're just a phone call or email away.
Yeah, 100%.
And thank you to our listeners. And the usual reminder to hit the like and subscribe button so you can stay up to date. And remember too, subscribing to Highland Waves is free. Our thought for today is by John Bakley. And it is, most people don't plan to fail. They just fail to plan.
That's a good one.
So long for now, Pat.